In this video, I'm going to answer the question, should you play The Division 2 in 2024? I'm going to tell you why I and many others have put thousands of hours into this game, but more importantly, why I found myself playing the game less and less. Hello, I'm Abrax and welcome to my deep dive into Tom Clancy's The Division 2 and what it has to offer players in 2024. In this video, I'll be breaking down The Division 2, looking at the gameplay, content, and equipping you with all of the knowledge you need to decide whether or not this is the game for you. If you've curiously clicked on this video without a clue of what I'm talking about, let's get the obvious out of the way. What is The Division 2? Tom Clancy's The Division 2 is a third-person open-world looter shooter developed by Massive Entertainment and published by Ubisoft in March 2019. In The Division 2, you take control of an agent of the Division, a highly trained sleeper agent that are only activated when all else fails with one objective: save what remains. The Division 2 has you travel Washington DC months after the dollar flu outbreak that has ravaged the country, to help retake DC from various hostile factions attempting to take its streets for themselves: the Hyenas, the Outcasts, and the True Sons. You're thinking, sounds good, but do I have the hardware to play it? You can find The Division 2 on PC through Steam, UbiConnect, and Epic, or you can play it on console via the Xbox One, Xbox S and X, PlayStation 4, and PlayStation 5. It is also worth mentioning, due to the game's age, it does not come with crossplay or cross-save. Okay, what about price? We're still weeks away from payday, and you still need to splash out on whatever is on sale from Steam to add to your wishlist and ever-growing backlog. Like I say, remember, The Division 2 at this point is over 5 years old, which means the price drops heavily on a regular basis. As an example, on Ubisoft Connect, their own launcher on PC, the base game has an RRP of $34.99, but it's currently reduced to $8.75. But if you also wanted to pick it up with the expansion Warlords of New York, which I have to say is a must if you want to play The Division 2 in 2024, then that's only $12.50 reduced from $49.99. I would, at this point in the game's life, highly recommend you pick it up on sale. If it's currently full price, honestly, you won't have to wait long and the price will plummet once again. Just keep an eye out. Let's talk gameplay, content, and all that other good stuff. As I've said, The Division 2 is a third-person open-world cover-based looter shooter. A looter shooter being a genre that merges point-and-click gameplay of a shooter with the character progression and loot that comes with a more traditional RPG. This means you'll be spending a lot of your time in-game, shooting your way through missions or open-world activities, using the cover to help keep yourself alive, then collecting loot along the way in forms of weapons and gear to create builds that help shape your character and the way you want to play the game. This could be as simple as stacking all damage talents and attributes so you hit like a truck, but your armor has the durability of wet toilet paper. Or you could get a bit more creative and put something together that adds a little survivability to your build at the expense of your damage. Or how about you just go all in on your character's skills, known as their SHD tech, or shade. These can be turrets, attack drones, or different types of healing tools that you can use to keep your team alive. Or maybe you want to go for more of a crowd control focus using foam launchers or blinder fireflies. In its simplest form, putting a build together in The Division 2 works using 3 core attributes: damage, armor, and skill tier. On your 6 pieces of gear, your mask, chest, gloves, backpack, holster, and knee pads, you can only have one of these attributes, so you have to try and balance your attributes through those 6 slots. Each slot also has 2 minor attributes on each piece of gear. These are more things like crit chance, headshot damage, skill haste, and armor regen. These attributes give your builds those finer tweaks, adding to the damage, skill utility, or survivability. So what can you do with this build that you've spent so much time on, or where can you farm that last missing piece that will pull everything together? First off, The Division 2 has a full story campaign that will take you around a 1-to-1 scale Washington DC map. You'll mainly play the story through missions that take place in interesting areas or buildings around DC. Areas like the Grand Washington Hotel, Air and Space Museum, and Lincoln Memorial. Along the way, you'll also take on side missions and open world activities like hostage rescues and stopping enemy resource convoys. After you finish that main story, the endgame will start to open up, giving you quite a lot of choice when it comes to content to grind for stronger gear and weapons. I'll break the types of content down into 5 categories: missions, open world, game modes, seasons, and PvP. First, let's talk missions. Really, these are the same missions that you ran through the story campaign, but with changeable difficulties. These can be re-ran to farm gear and weapons. Some of these missions do also come with an additional difficulty: Legendary. These are designed with 4 players in mind, where the game's enemy faction is replaced by the White Tusk, an elite version of the Black Tusk, a faction you will meet when you reach the endgame. Even though these legendary missions have been put together as a group content, if you are really up for a challenge, you can run these solo, but if you decide to give this a go, strap in because you are in for one hell of a fight. Truth be told, other than legendaries, I don't find myself running missions too often, if at all for the loot. Compared to some of the other activities, they get repetitive quite quick and they're actually quite long for what you get out of them. It's not that they aren't well designed, in fact some of them are pretty interesting areas that are just fun to explore and look at. It's more, they just get very repetitive very fast. Unlike some of the other content, missions become predictable, which doesn't make them very interesting to farm loot in. Next, let's move on to open world content. This comes in a few different flavors, with the open world in The Division 2 actually being pretty active with different things going on and different activities for you to interact with. These days, I mainly play The Division 2 solo, so my go-to most of the time is to head out into the open world, usually heading to the closest control point. Control points are defensive points on the map held by an enemy faction that you need to take back. When you attack a control point and defeat the faction camped out there, you'll then have to defend it against a few waves before completely taking it over and getting access to a lovely loot cache. Control points can also be retaken by groups of enemies that they send to take them back, or later on you can just manually reset these if you just want to constantly run them for a certain type of loot. There's also hostages to rescue, propaganda broadcasts to stop, resource convoys to interrupt, and more. As I said, the open world is one of my favourite things to do in this game. Not only is it a fantastic representation of a post-pandemic city being reclaimed by overgrowth, litter, and scenes of panic from past chaos, but it's also just very active, it's very hostile, and to me, I genuinely think it's worth exploring. Alright, let's talk game modes. Over the years, a few different game modes have been added to The Division 2. Some that were pretty big wins for the game, and others that were just sort of confusing. Let's start with one of the weirder choices here. Kenley College. Kenley College is a genuinely beautifully designed map that you may or may not see depending on if it's open. Yeah, you heard that right. For whatever reason, Kenley College has periodic opening times being closed for weeks at a time. This is still a choice that I just cannot understand. Even if nobody was interacting with the game mode itself, just having the area open for the fans of photo mode would mean they could get out there and still do stuff with what's being created. Even now, as I write this script, it says next available at an unannounced time, which I'd struggle to comprehend. Why not have a game mode like this always open? Even if it's not popular, there's going to be some people who enjoy it who want to go play that content. I just don't understand having it closed every so often. It just doesn't make sense. So let's hypothetically say it's open. What can you do there? The first time you enter Kenley College is actually pretty fun. There's a bit of an investigation game mode here where you have to explore 3 areas looking for clues to what's happened to a missing patrol. During your first run through, it's genuinely quite enjoyable. I personally really enjoyed this. However, once you've completed everything for the first time, you just redo the exact same thing, but the game turns it into more of a time trial. So you're being timed to do these activities, which is fine, but the initial investigation was part of the fun of the game mode. Everyone thought this was going to be updated with new investigations and new things to do, but sadly it just landed on being a time trial that you could play every so often if it's open. Right, enough of that, let's move on to something more fun, Countdown. Countdown is an 8-player mission set in a power plant, where you get to do a few missions chosen at random when you start, with the overall goal of stopping the plant from having a meltdown before you have to extract. Countdown is a really good time to matchmake into, and one of the best ways to get a huge amount of loot within a short amount of time. Each run of Countdown is under 15 minutes, with there being a fail state when the timer reaches 0. Countdown is fast, chaotic, and a really good loot farm. Next, we have the Summit. If you have ever wanted to live out your fantasy of donning a white vest, kicking off your shoes, and chasing hands down in a New York City skyscraper, then I'd probably keep walking. The summit is a 100-floor skyscraper where you need to fight your way to the top, taking on random objectives, layouts, and enemy factions as you go, with a pretty epic fight with everyone's favourite masked friends once you reach the top. As you're playing your way through the floors, you can see the potential behind the game mode. It just misses the mark slightly. For example, because this mode uses randomly generated floors, those layouts need to fit wherever you are on that skyscraper, whether that's floor 2 or 98. This means there are no windows whatsoever. They're all covered by blinds or debris, which takes away from that feeling that you are in fact ascending a skyscraper. There's just no feeling of height or scale, just another floor with a similar vibe until you eventually reach the top. This leaves the game mode feeling more like a treadmill than a heroic ascent. Next, let's talk about Descent, a roguelike game mode that strips you of all of your gear, weapons, and skills, and throws you into a training simulation to take on randomly generated rooms, and eventually taking on the Nemesis, a tricky boss encounter. However, when you die playing Descent, you need to start from the very beginning. Descent is one of the more replayable game modes in The Division 2, with you not knowing what kind of weapons, gear, or talents you'll be getting as you play through the game mode. To start with, you get to pick one weapon and one skill from a choice of 3 randomly selected. Then at the end of every loop, you get the choice to pick another. A loop is a collection of rooms where you have combat encounters, and after each room, you get to pick a talent. Now these are the same talents that you'll find on the normal chest and backpacks in the main game, but with a twist. In the Descent, they can actually stack, making them more powerful every time you pick a talent that you already have. Despite me saying the Descent is one of the more replayable game modes, that doesn't necessarily make it fun. Now this is more of an opinion, but personally I like using my own character and progressing my gear on that character, and playing Descent feels more like playing its own game within a game. Yes, you do earn rewards that you can then use on your main character, but it never really feels like enough to justify the time you have to put into that game mode. Now these might not be considered traditional game modes, but I thought they would best fit here, and that's the raids and the incursion. The Division 2 does currently have 2 raids, Iron Horse and Dark Hours. I have to say, these are some of the most fun I've had in The Division 2. The raids have you take on different difficult bosses, each with unique mechanics to learn in a group of 8 agents. And there's honestly nothing more fun than gathering a group of 8 people, going into one of these raids blind, and trying to figure out the mechanics for yourselves. If you do pick up the game, I would highly recommend looking for a raid team and giving these a try. Then we have the Incursion Paradise Lost, a difficult 4-player mission that takes you to the Marriott estate. Think of incursions as smaller 4-player raids, using unique and interesting mechanics you have to learn to earn exclusive rewards. So let's talk about the darker side of the game's content, the dark zone, if you will. But seriously, PvP in The Division 2 is currently in a very rough state, as it has been for a while now. And honestly, right now, I can't really give you an accurate idea of what it's like, because every time I try and jump back into PvP in The Division 2, within a round or 2 of conflict, or running around an empty dark zone for 20 minutes, I just tend to put it back down. Conflict is The Division 2's pure PvP mode, putting 2 teams of 4 agents against each other in various match types. And of course we have the Dark Zones. These are 3 PvPvE areas that the franchise is probably the best known for. In The Division 1, the Dark Zone really was the place to be, and I'd bet even today, going on 9 years after the release of the first game, there are still players running around that Dark Zone. Sadly, the same can't be said for The Division 2, with the choice to split the Dark Zone into 3 smaller zones, lowering the player count along with that per zone. It just ruined that gameplay flow that made the first game's Dark Zone really shine. Right now, if you're into PvP, I honestly don't think The Division 2 is the place to get it. By all means, give it a try, you might really enjoy it, but you have been warned. That's currently all of the main game modes, but there's still a lot in the game I haven't even touched on. Bounties, projects, collectibles, and commendations, which are The Division 2's version of achievements. After 5 years, There is plenty to do in this game, and honestly, I think there is something here for everyone. Finally, for content, let's talk seasons. When you hit level 40, you'll gain access to seasons. These come with a range of timed events, as well as new pieces of story, with each season slowly progressing the narrative. So far, the way they've been doing this is with manhunts and other activities using a similar structure. Manhunts all have a prime target, and 4 smaller targets that unlock as the seasons progress. On top of this, there's also global events which add modifiers and rewards, leagues which are essentially speedruns, and apparel events to farm for new cosmetics and more. Seasons have been fine, but once you hit the endgame, they start to get repetitive fast. Don't get me wrong, if you're new to the game, new to the endgame, these are pretty fun with a good variety of activities to get stuck into. But as someone with way over 2,000 hours in this game, these activities are currently the only thing I have to log in for at this point, and they require me to do missions and activities I've been doing for over the last 5 years. This takes me back to the statement I made at the beginning of the video about logging in less and less. For long-term players, the Division 2 currently doesn't have much worth logging in for. Yes, there's season activities, but once you've done a global event or a league, they all just feel like rehashes of the previous activities with a different backpack trophy as a reward. And recently, I found myself wanting to log in for these trophies less and less, as they felt like less of a fun activity I do in my spare time, and more like work. There is still a few progression grinds there for me, but again, it just means I'm still rerunning the same content on repeat. I log in, I do whatever weekly manhunt task is there, then I log off, and right now that's just not fun. However, right now there is a gleam of light through those grey clouds. Seasons are currently set to change at some point in the not so distant future, with the developers launching Season 2.0. However, at the moment, we have no real idea of what that's going to be or how they will play. The original idea for Season 2.0 was seasonal characters, starting from level 1 every season, but this idea was so heavily pushed back by the overall community, the devs have walked the idea back and are currently working on the next idea for Season 2.0. As I mentioned earlier when we talked pricing, there is also a full DLC expansion for the Division 2, Warlords of New York. This comes with its own story, Lower Manhattan map, loot, cosmetics, and honestly, I would highly recommend picking this up, especially with the price dropping as a bundle on a regular basis. As well as this, we also have a whole new expansion DLC planned for the future, which is going to take place in Brooklyn, although there's not a lot of information about that yet. Okay, so I went a little deeper into content than I initially planned, but at least that gives you a pretty good overview of what's to offer in this game. So let's bring all of this in for that final question. Should you play the Division 2 in 2024? First, if you have never played the Division 2 before and you're thinking of picking this game up for the first time, I genuinely think this is a game worth your time, especially if you're a fan of RPGs, MMO lights, or other looter shooters like Warframe, Destiny 2, or The First Descendant. If you've played the Division 2 in the past and you're debating whether or not to come back, it really depends on you and at what point you left the game. If you have not played Warlords of New York, I would recommend picking that up and jumping in. If you're just looking for something to grind out some gear, try out some builds, it's still a game worth playing. But if you want that story, it's been fed to us in such small dribs and drabs through the seasons, you'd almost be better going over to NGN's channel and checking out some of the recent lore videos. Let me know whether or not you decide to jump into the Division 2 for the first time in the comments below. I would love to say hi to new players joining the community. If you are a returning player, welcome back. Let me know what you currently think of the state of the game. Again, I'd love to talk about it in the comments below. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to give it a like and subscribe for future uploads. If you'd like to support the channel, you can do that here on YouTube by becoming a channel member or over on Patreon. All support goes straight back into the channel, helping me create better quality content for you. Have a great day, and I'll catch you in the next one.